The shiur is לרפואה שלמה, עליזה בית רגינה.
אמן. Okay. So, picking up where we left off last week, I just want to conclude this one crucially important discussion that we had about truth being truth, and about many evils having their roots in distortions of the truth, perversions of the truth, additions to or subtractions from, and in how details have the capacity to obscure the truth. So it's possible, by getting obsessed with the details of a particular truth, of a particular generality, it's entirely possible that you obscure almost completely the general truth behind it. And this is the cause of many different evils. I didn't quote this last week, but I should have. The Midrash, beautiful Midrash, that points out some inconsistencies in the Psukim in the story of Adam and Hawa in Gan Eden, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Adam that he's allowed to eat from any tree he wants, just Me'etzadat Tov Hara, you do not have the right to eat from Me'etzadat Tov Hara, the tree that brings to knowledge of good and bad. The day you eat from this tree, you're going to die. So the Nahash, when he approaches Hawa, probably not physical, as the Rambam insists, but his temptation of her, his seduction of her, is based on the idea that she can neither eat nor neither eat from nor touch this tree. Says the Midrash, who told her that it's a surah for her to touch the tree? It doesn't appear anywhere in the Psukim. It's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told
that was the
Adam. So this is Adam. This is a relatively minor detail. If at the end of the day you're not supposed to be eating from the tree, it's probably a good idea not to come too close to it. There's such an expression by the Nazir, where the Nazir is not allowed to eat, not allowed to drink wine, not allowed to drink grape juice, can't eat grapes or raisins or even the seeds or the peels, like nothing to do with grapes. I get it. So, says the Gemara, whenever a Nazir comes near a vineyard, we would say to him, Sahor sihor, amrilan lenzira, lecharma la tiqrab. You, the Nazir, you're supposed to be separate. You're supposed to distance yourself from all that's related to wine, even the grapes, even the peels and the seeds. So wherever you see a vineyard, just walk around it. Don't even walk into it. You walk into it, you're going to end up getting in trouble. So the Nahash tells her like this, says the Midrash. Your husband told you, right, erroneously, but your husband told you that you're not supposed to eat from the tree and you're not allowed to touch it, implying that the consequences of the two would be the same. It's not what Hashem said, it's what he said. Okay, so today would say we have mitzvot midoraita, mitzvot midorabanan, so be careful about this, and don't do this either. So what does the Midrash say? The Midrash says that Nahash pushed her into the tree. Oh, you see, you touched it, nothing happened. So just like nothing happened when you touch the tree, it's going to happen when you eat from it. He was trying to tell you to protect it, to hide it for whatever reason, etc., had some kind of agenda. So you gave me too many details. If this detail is not true, maybe that one's not either. And all of a sudden, we go from touching to eating to problems, serious problems. So it is entirely possible that someone tried to understand a particular topic and get lost in the details surrounding it, or take things out of perspective, mix them up in such a way that it no longer makes sense. And I pointed out last week that you can even come to the opposite conclusion just based on the details that you find. Easy example of this: Shalom Bayit. Any couple considering getting married, any couple that considers getting married will inevitably have ups and downs and challenges and difficulties, etc. So very easily you can lose the importance of the mitzvah itself by getting too caught up in the details of little arguments, little disputes, little fights, etc. So yes, it could be that you delve too deeply into the seemingly negative side of it, and you lose the perspective, and you say, well, if we're going to fight, why should we bother, sticking it out? Why should we bother pushing for, waiting for better times? May as well just end it now. Euthanize the relationship. So, true fighting, disputes, arguments are a part of life. It's a part of living with someone who is relatively opposite to you in many ways. And And if you focus only on this, you can come to the conclusion that it's all about fights and arguments. If you focus on the happy, positive times, then the fighting becomes a detail. So we fight, we argue, we dispute, it happens, but it's infrequent, not so intense, not so impossible to deal with or to overcome, etc. But yes, we mentioned also briefly that the Kabbalistic nature of the discussion is that there is no such thing as evil. Evil is a myth, it's a mirage, it's just an illusion. And the only way that evil can possibly exist is only by virtue of its borrowing its existence from good. In other words, it's always some good concept, some good idea, some godly item that gets contorted or twisted or corrupted into good. It only exists thanks to its deriving its existence from some good root somewhere, and it can have completely damaging and detrimental effects. It can be the difference between life and death, but there has to be some truth mixed in it in order for it to survive. Just bear this in mind. We'll come across this idea at more than one.
Retroactive challenge to Mort's question, and kind of a corollary to what you're mentioning. How logically could we possibly even conceive of evil for its own right, or evil irrespective of good? It doesn't actually make any sense, because the definition of evil is, at least in our everyday life, when we see something that looks bad, we only know it's bad because it's counter to what we know is good.
So you're basing this on your understanding that not everyone already understands. In other words, if I were to tell you, you're in chapter 2 or 3, I say, okay, but we can go back to the introduction and I can say, easy enough, why could God not have created evil too, for the sake of evil? I can't make a metaphysical argument against that. God wanted there to be good and evil, created good, created evil. Tough. What's your problem with that? Yeah, how could God create evil? He wanted there to be free will. Our argument's a little bit more nuanced than that, because we explain that Hashem created the potential for evil, but it's effectively the same. Hashem left room for evil, left room for doubt, left room for denial of his own existence, so to speak. So it wouldn't be that hard for us to explain. Back to what Mort said last week, there are nafqabinot, as we would say in Aramaic. There are consequences to this understanding. If you really understand that every form of evil is effectively some twisted form of something that has some good to it, you have a much more sophisticated understanding of how evil functions. Evil garners support. Evil gets help. Evil is tempting and seducing and enticing, and that's because it appeals to fundamentally, potentially good, features of our neshama. And it's the good going the wrong way that is the root of all evil. So the road to hell is paved with good intentions, as we said last week. That's just key. All I'm saying is so it's true that there's no such thing as good that exists as evil, as an entity in and of itself. There's no devil that exists beyond God's desire for there to be such a thing, but that in reality it's us using our own forces against ourselves whenever someone has a breakdown or a collapse or a lapse of judgment. You can usually find good in it. The difference between being totally right and totally wrong and saying, well, and when I was in high school, the first teacher that introduced me to this, we were in maybe 9th grade, and it was the first time that I ever got credit on a test for being wrong but consistent. So we have these we're doing geometry and trigonometry, a little bit more complicated, so we have these 10, 12, 15 step problems. And I never liked writing things down, but I got into the habit of doing it. At some point, I saw that I made a mistake. Just a clerical error. I copied something wrong from one column to the next, one page to the next. So instead of getting an absolute 0 on one of 20 questions on the test, I got wrong but consistent. So I got maybe 50, 60%. Would you have gotten to the right conclusion? I'd not made this small mistake. So that's a big difference between nothing and something. Wrong but consistent. So give you infinite examples of this.
So there is no pure evil in the Jewish philosophy. Pure meaning like 100% evil, 0% good.
The closest it comes to pure evil.
Sorry.
Yeah, I work in meatpacking. Don't even ask.
No,
my fridge is hot.
Yeah.
You're hot?
No,
You're still cold?
I don't want to be by
By the way,
That's what it says. It says eat, and then do not eat. There's no not eating if you can't eat from from all the all the other trees.
So the discussion in and of itself is fascinating. You can justify either side.
Yeah.
If you cut it too close, if you shave to the millimeter, you're going to make mistakes. It's impossible. So it's human nature that mistakes are possible. We're programmed for that. The possibility for evil exists. So what's our response to this? To take a very large security buffer, so the security buffer itself cannibalizes the good. It keeps you distant from things that are evil, a mixture of good and evil, even mostly good. You're just shooting for pure good all the time. But that's impossible. You leave no room for deviation. You've basically made everything asur, everything is forbidden, everything is off limits. It's impossible. I mean, no, you've basically gone back.
Are we talking about Nikur again?
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's another, and that's a funny example. I had this discussion was it yesterday, today.
Every day we have this.
And it comes up, but it epitomizes so much of this. Meat has to be kosher. Fine. You can't eat the blood. You can't eat the chelev, the forbidden fats. Okay. So take off this, take off that, take off this. No, I'm more observant than you. We don't even touch the whole back half of the animal. Great. Now what happens? Jews who want this eat non-kosher. You were careful about taking off certain things because you wanted to make sure everybody's eating kosher. In the end, you made it so difficult that it was complicated, it was expensive, nobody does it anymore. Okay, so where do we end up? We end up with Jews eating non-kosher. Not only is the chelev non-kosher, they're eating non-kosher meat and non-kosher blood. So you tried to go so far to one side, you ended up coming full circle the other way. What's our approach, our philosophical approach to evil? Is it sanitize and sterilize everything? There are people who take this approach. I'm sure some of them are even friends of yours. We all know people like this. The obsessive compulsive, every little minor detail has to be 1000% polished and covered, etc. Okay, so you eat nothing, you go nowhere, you do nothing, you say nothing, you don't live. And the more room you leave for mistakes, then the more likely mistakes are to happen. But the problem is that mistakes will happen either way, just different kinds of mistakes. There are mistakes of being too permissive, and there are mistakes that are engendered by someone being too strict and too forbidding. And there's no escaping that. It's always a balance between permitting and forbidding, between accepting and rejecting. All these things are true. Converts, the classic example. Converts. Good, bad. I had this discussion, don't even ask me. Too long a story. Something came up. Someone's identity being not exactly Jewish. Fine, happens all the time. So what's our purpose? Are we supposed to be accepting converts or rejecting them? Silly question, right? Because we're supposed to be what? Accepting them or rejecting them? Well, okay, we accept all of them.
We have a mitzvah to love the convert, so we have to accept him at some point.
How many converts do we have to accept in order to fulfill the mitzvah? I accept one per generation, and I love the guy. What?
You have a point.
No, I don't know.
The question is there an extra mitzvah to love the convert, to force yourself to love him? Is that what you're asking?
My easy answer, no, I'm saying, is our goal as Jews to accept converts or to reject them? Discuss. Every candidate...
as soon as they're a convert, they become Jews, so it's not even a question.
Okay, fair enough. What the Torah said, love the convert, it means only the super frum, observant, beyond a reasonable doubt ones. So like one per generation, and I love him. I don't take advantage of him, I lend him money, I make him happy on the Chagim. I fulfilled all my obligations. No. I have a mitzvah to accept every candidate for conversion. Maybe yes, maybe no. What happens if we accept every candidate for conversion?
Well, we become Christians.
Basically. We become nothing. You've diluted Judaism to absolute nothingness. You're going to end up with people who have no inspirations or motivations, with questionable motivations, people who are doing it for marriage, for money, for fame, for fortune, for fun, who knows. So you've basically destroyed everything, right? So our response to this is don't accept anyone, right? You don't know of communities like this? Starts with an S, right? You don't know communities like this?
I don't want to name names.
There have been problems with converts in the past, so we reject all of them because we are so holy and we are so special. Never has there been a problem or an issue in our community. We reject outright any convert, regardless of the bid din, regardless of the background, man or woman, and how many generations. We reject everyone. Yeah, that's a healthy spiritual, productive, healthy spiritual approach. So, what's the response? The response is you have halacha. Halacha is that you need to verify the authenticity of the motivation, and at the end of the day, it's going to come down to discretion and judgment. So you have some controls. Try to make sure it's more or less interest-free, more or less, as genuine as motivations can be. Is it possible that someone have mixed motivations and still do the right thing? It's possible. It happens to the best of us. So But every single question is going to be like this. You're checking knives, you're checking lungs in the slaughterhouse. Your goal is to be strict or to be lenient. You want to be so strict that we shecht 2 cows a day and kosher meat costs even more than it costs right now. Or is our goal to be lenient and permissive and let everything fly? And what's the purpose of checking? To make sure it's kosher or not kosher? Okay. Is the purpose of kosher to make it so expensive that no one can eat it and therefore everybody eats non-kosher? Well, that can't be it.
So the whole theology.
So it's a
is
dilemma.
right
It's just it's conflicting ideals, and our goal would be to find some kind of balance. But it has to be some kind of middle ground. But everybody finds a middle ground somewhere else. Everybody defines the middle differently. And that's the nature of these different communities. You have communities that are very permissive, or that are very forbidding, and all kinds of different shades of gray in the middle. So, yeah. And it's not that you wouldn't find illegitimate. So because there was once an illegitimate candidate for conversion, they're all wrong. Okay, enough to overreact. Maybe there were a few in the past. We have a systematic way of dealing with it if it comes up. And there are places that'll tell you, look, the Gemara says, Masechet Pesachim, the only reason the Jews went into exile is to gather the Gerim. You may never have heard of this Gemara before. Go chew on that. The whole purpose of us being in exile is just to collect the Gerim. That's just to bring them into the fold. So we should be accepting everybody. We should open a Kabbalah center on every corner of Manila. Already is.
Does that mean Gerim in the conversion sense, or Gerim in the sense of nations, that we should bring the nations towards the philosophy of one God?
Ger is a convert, not a nation. A Ger is a convert. Goy might be a nation. The reason the Gemara says it explicitly. The reason we went into exile is to collect the Ger. It's a whole fascinating discussion. We'll talk about this around Shavuot. But what on earth does that mean? So the whole purpose of the galut is to collect the gifts. So maybe we need more galut and more gerim. I don't know. Maybe if anything, we should start a blog, open a website, and encourage people wholesale by the pallet. Yeah.
It's been done, right?
Someone beat us to it. Yeah, thought it was a great idea for a business. All right, I guess not. So no. So how do you resolve every single Gemara you look at, every single mitzvah? You're going to find this. You're going to find an extreme over here, an extreme over there. Rebbe used to talk about this all the time. This is the nature of halakha, it's the nature of Torah. You find that halakha is very often hammered out between extremes. This is the most important mitzvah in the world, and this is the worst avirah in the world. You find sometimes these extreme declarations. And then you learn there are balances between the mitzvot, that sometimes this mitzvah takes precedence over that one. What are the limits? How far can we go to embellish and to fancify and beautify mitzvah? How far do you need to go in being careful of certain avirot? What risks do you run when you go to extremes? If you try to be super careful about this one avirah, you're probably ignoring others. Or super careful about this mitzvah, you're probably ignoring others. So context and perspective, again, are the key. I don't want to go too heavy on the introduction, but that's always going to be part and parcel of everything that you learn going forward. You learn a mitzvah, you learn an avirah. What are the limits? What are the extremes? And how does this fit into my vocabulary of spirituality? What order of priority and how much emphasis does this deserve, etc. We also mentioned the number of details is basically infinite, and therefore it's impossible to grasp all of them. And so there's going to be, for a fact, there's going to be Yetzer Hara to obsess over the details and lose the big idea. One of the classic tools of Yetzer Hara. There are 1,000 details to this mitzvah, so either just don't bother learning them because you're never going to get them right, or learn all the details and then kind of lose the mitzvah, lose the forest for the trees, as we say. So you have to be reminded both of the general rules and of the particular details, and that's another lifestyle choice you have to make. You can't learn all the details all the time, but you can't ignore them. So Rebbe used to say, okay, so you have to learn Mishnah, general rules, general concepts, general topics, and every day you have to learn some halachot. You can't learn all of them, but you can't ignore them. So I have to justify focusing on this one particular area of halakha for a day, for a week, for a month, for a year. Eventually I have to move on to something else, but this is the nature of learning. You have to start somewhere. You get on the train somewhere, and you end up wherever you end up. You can't use the infinite details as an excuse never to get involved in details. And you can't spend all your time in generalities and not learn the technical, practical details of the halachot. Very good. So, Yohan, please, page 23 at the bottom, the very last 3 lines.
23. Okay. Beautiful. By its very nature, every general principle includes many details. As a result, when a person grasps a general principle, automatically he also grasps a large number of details. Although, at the outset, a person possessing a general principle might not be aware of its specific details and recognize them as elements of the general principle. Later, when confronted by them, he will be able to recognize them. Once he is aware of the general principle, he will not be at a loss to recognize the details that fall under it and cannot exist without it. This is what our sages meant when they taught us, words of Torah should always be in your hands as general principle rather than as individual details.
Okay, fair enough. We have Chazal themselves pointed this out, so it's not such a tremendous novelty. You should know that it's impossible to know everything all the time. Therefore, even when you're learning the mitzvot, even when you're learning Torah, be careful to focus on the general overriding principles. Details, you'll find many. You can look them up as needed. You can try to learn them somewhat systematically, but don't allow this to overwhelm you, because the general principles are really the key. That's pretty much what the book is about, by the way. He goes on and talks about prophecy, our relationship with Hashem, and the perspectives on the mitzvot, but always from a general perspective. It's not a book of halacha. He's not going to tell you what you can and can't do on Shabbat. Talk more about why we keep Shabbat, what Shabbat's so important for, what it means to us, what happens to us and for us when we observe it. There's the more general rules. The halachic details you can pick up. They're just not in the particular realm of this particular day.
So his recommendation is pretty much to start, let's say you learn halacha, or it could be any kind of philosophical concept. You start with the main principle, and whatever you can deduct from that, you do, and if you need to learn more details, because there are things that are very particular, you would do.
Yes, so it's a very effective way of learning. For example, we have such a concept as Shabbat. General principle, general rule. On Shabbat, there are 39 forms of work that are forbidden. So, in case you don't know any of them or can't identify them, don't do anything on Shabbat, you haven't violated it. Then you can learn kind of generally what these forms of work are and how not to violate the Shabbat. Then you can also learn what's permitted to do on Shabbat. So depending on a particular context or particular situations, again, it's Ruach HaKodesh. You need divine inspiration to be able to do this. You need to know which details apply and which ones don't. By the way, apropos our discussion about 5 minutes ago, the same applies to teaching someone who's just becoming observant or someone who's interested in conversion, for that matter, because we constantly encounter both. Someone who has a negative attitude towards the mitzvot, I can tell you this as a rabbi, find someone who has a negative attitude towards the mitzvot. A good example of this would be someone who grew up in an observant home and didn't like the way Torah was presented to them, went to religious school and got beat up and made fun of. I don't know, it happens all the time.
No, it
Didn't
doesn't.
really connect with the didn't really connect. Terrible quote. The president of the Texas chapter of Jews for Jesus once said that if he had a budget, he would sponsor an Orthodox day school education for every Jew in America. Ouch. Ouch, that really hurts. So, so basically, you need to know which general concepts you can get across and how receptive somebody is to details. So if someone comes to my house and says, oh, I hate Shabbat because I can't do this, that, or the other thing, we could probably develop a whole discussion at the table, what you can do on Shabbat and how much fun Shabbat is and how great it is, etc. If you happen to engage in conversation with one of these obsessive compulsive types for whom everything is asur on Shabbat, and you can either go with the flow and say, you can be serious about this, careful about that, etc. Or you can try to introduce other opinions that maybe aren't so strict. Sometimes you have a discussion in front of people like children or people who aren't so observant, and you want to balance the discussion out a little bit. So you can get into infinite, minute little details. Sometimes you can enlighten the conversation by bringing a general truth to it. You want a funny example of this? I'll give you a funny example of this. Everybody in our generation is obsessive compulsive over electricity on Shabbat. It's nice to be careful, we should. To make the claim that electricity is a surah midoraita is to claim the Torah addresses the topic of electricity. Right? Either by way of direct current or alternating current. You get to choose, either AC, DC. How is that fathomable that the Torah even relates to electricity? Now, you can call it a minhag. You can say the custom is not to use electricity. That's accurate. to explain how or why or at what voltages does it apply is a fascinating discussion. Half of what we don't do today on Shabbat, since all these melachot that we don't do anymore are pretty much antiquated, who actually grinds their own flour at home? I mean,
You grind pepper when you have like a manual fancy pepper.
we do,
grinder.
yeah, pepper mill. We do. I don't think people in our day and age know how to hold a needle, let alone how to fix their own clothes or to, sew or knit. My wife makes kippot, she crochets a little bit. What's the applicability of most of the malachot today is very distant. Electricity is probably the biggest deal. So here's a really interesting general concept. Electricity is probably not even a surah midrabbanan. Very, very hard to make the case that even our sages forbade it, or would have forbidden it for that matter. That today we don't do it is probably by virtue of a custom. Don't come out with the wrong conclusion that I condone the use of electronics on Shabbat. The point that I'm making is that this is one of those general concepts. So before someone gets a heart attack over, oh my God, I can't believe it, accidentally bumped into the lights or accidentally, answered the phone, I don't know what. It's probably not the spiritual heart attack that we make it out to be. And that's just a function of knowing the general rules of Shabbat, knowing that Moshe didn't discuss this in the Torah, it can't be Midaraita. Chazal may never have even dreamt of such a thing, or if they did, they didn't commit it to writing, so let's just keep it in perspective. We'll make mistakes, no one's going to die, it's not the end of the world, and we'll move on. Some many Rabbanim that wanted to permit the use of battery-operated items on Shabbat. They said none of the claims against electricity should apply to any of this. I'm not saying you do it, but that's one of those things, kind of the perspective that turns things on its head. The important thing is to know that there are general rules. It either applies or doesn't apply. And once you can put this in the right category and say, maybe this is just a custom that we don't use electronics on Shabbat, which is fine. I'm not saying we should continue observing the custom. If I had my cell phone and my email on Shabbat, Shabbat wouldn't be Shabbat. Absolutely. Not in the spirit of Shabbat. But that having been said, it probably occupies much more emotional space, in our minds than it should. I'm not saying you should not observe it. I'm just saying it shouldn't be the heart attack that it is.
But by way of tangent, assuming that avoiding electricity on Shabbat is Minhag Yisrael, how would it be tried in a court?
You can't try people over.
I'm just saying, let's say there was a Sanhedrin today and somebody, would you be like, it would be the
If there were
Malkot
Sanhedrin
maybe?
today, we would probably have much bigger fish to fry.
And you would
Whether or
not-
not I'm using a cell phone on Shabbat.
You would never make a korban because of a mistake.
No.
You could let them eat after tomorrow.
If a court felt the need, it could potentially punish people. But again,
But it wouldn't be like Hayavita. It's not like Chilul Shabbat.
what could you punish? It's a custom. I don't observe the custom, so it could theoretically be possible that a bit didn't find it appropriate to punish somebody for not observing a custom. But come on, man, there are things that are much more serious. Driving a car on Shabbat, you're combusting fuel. Actually burning something. It's a much bigger deal. So
Electric car.
we would seriously have electric cars, right? We would have much higher orders of priority to go through than this. That's not even a
That
question.
wasn't my question. My question was,
Yeah.
let's say there was only one case left in the world, and it was this guy who turned on a light switch. I'm just wondering how it would be tried, or what that person would be liable for.
Good question. Liable at the biblical level, absolutely not. At the rabbinic level, probably not. If they wanted to enforce something just to get the point across, maybe they could. But it wouldn't be anything. Certainly not capital punishment. God forbid. If anything, they could admonish him. Maybe they could administer corporal punishment if they wanted to, like makat marudut. It's like for rebelling against one. It's not in the context of the conversation. Anyhow, we'll move on. We'll just conclude the introduction. Hopefully today. Abigail, please.
When dealing with general principles, however, one must be very careful to grasp all their aspects and areas of validity. Even elements that initially may seem superfluous should not be ignored, but should be taken to heart and put in the back of one's mind until their place in the general scheme becomes clear.
In other words, you might sometimes learn about a rule that's difficult for you to apply. So instead of recycling it, just put it in the freezer. You'll eventually come to a point where it'll fit into the context. That's really crucial. Rebbe, again, another classic tip, because he was so strong in these, in the approach, the attitude, the general context of things. He would refer to learning Torah as like building your own encyclopedia. You always start somewhere. There's no right or wrong place to start. Your goal is to accomplish as much as you can. at the same time, your definitions of things have to be fluid. So, the first time I heard about Shabbat, it was, oh my God, don't touch the lights on Shabbat. Okay, fine, I won't do that again. And then the second time I heard about Shabbat, it was, Oneg Shabbat, I have to enjoy the Shabbat, How can I enjoy the Shabbat if I don't turn on the lights? So I have to expand the entry of Shabbat in my spiritual encyclopedia to include Shabbat, to be enjoyed, but only in certain ways. So you have food, you have drink, you have tefillah, Qira'at Torah, etc. We have all kinds of things that fit. And so your definition of these things constantly grows and changes. So too should be your definition of love, of marriage, of God, of reward, of punishment, good, evil, tzedakah, tefillah. Everything that we do, our understandings of these things evolve over time. And the world is created in such a way that that's not a heart attack. That's okay. It's okay that up until now I didn't know something and I just improved my understanding of it, or I just put it in the right context.
He's saying something a little bit different here, because what you're describing is effectively the acquisition of knowledge anywhere in life. It's basically a big pile of blocks, building blocks. But I think what he's saying here is that you're building something, let's say a tower or something, and then you have a block, like basically another pile that's maybe not attached to the one that you're currently building, but it will be later once you build it. You'll make a connection.
Well, general rules are really crucial, and so the general rule applies, that if you've learned a rule and you don't know how it applies, hang on to it. There might be an area of it or an aspect of it that's not clear. It doesn't mean that your understanding up until now is worthless. Your understanding is going to go through a couple of different stages, a couple of different phases, and it's okay that it go from chapter 1 to chapter 2 to chapter 3, from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. What he's talking about is different aspects of principles that you may or may not understand how to fit. Just hang on to them. The book is structured in such a way that it gives you a lot of these rules and concepts and ideas, and be patient. You will eventually find time for them. Take them to heart, put them in the back of your mind until their place in the general scheme becomes clear. So you have these floating concepts, these floating ideas that you haven't yet put in the right folder, and that's okay. Things become clear over time.
Furthermore, from the perspective of somebody who's coming with very little Torah to need to catch up a lot, I will learn something and it'll seem totally out of context and not very applicable to my life, and then I'll learn something like 6 months or a year later, and then I'll remember that thing that I learned previously, and it actually helped me to learn the new concept better because I have a second example to compare it to draw a parallel between the two.
There's a very powerful analogy that we have in our generation. The whole concept of digital media. So think of, who thought up the word? I remember the word processor back in the day. Again, this is about 800 years ago. Before they had typewriters where you could just type things, and it was pretty much the same. But that you had a screen that you could actually add things into and delete things from before they were actually printed on paper was this fascinating concept. Why are we wasting all this paper? And that's what I don't know if you know. Okay, this goes way back.
I stood at once.
Yeah, in a museum. Thank you. So in the 70s and 80s, when you wanted to draft a document, they called it word processors, right?
Right.
You were lucky if you could process at the pace of
Microsoft
words.
Word,
Yeah, so Microsoft Word. So you're sitting there coming up with this idea, and you used to print things and type them. You didn't like that, so you have to tear up the whole page, and you have to find where the page was in the thing, and you go ahead and retype it. Well, here everything happens in digital space. So you can add and copy and paste and insert and delete. So this is the way your mind is supposed to work. It's not like it's a book written from beginning to end. It's just that you focus on one thing at a time, you polish it, you develop your understanding of it, and then you put the book back on the shelf, and then you'll put it again the next time you refer to it. So as long as you have a way of organizing all these concepts that you're bombarded with, you'll make it's in a way. It's okay. The house phone was broken for a long time. We just got a new one. So the kids call me 10 times a day.
Out of an emergency.
No, like the way he's pulling my hair, she spilled the thing. Anyway.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
isn't it actually the idea of the care itself, of wanting to care about the actual principle? Isn't it actually re-examining the principle itself? Meaning not. Even if you think you own that principle, it's just re-examining it constantly, meaning it's not something that you think you've acquired.
Questioning it.
If not questioning it and making it evolve all the time, because as a strict principle, the way you've learned it, it's probably already dead by the time the second time you've already
I'll give you again.
encountered it.
One of Rebbe's classic example of this was Adam and Hawa and Gan Eden. Okay? So when you were 5, maybe they told you there was a naked man and a naked woman who were talking to a snake, had something to eat.
Which made
Didn't
no
sit
sense
well.
at all.
Huh?
Which made no sense at all.
Oh, no, right. Even when I was 5, that didn't make sense. You know, a lot less later on. So you have this story somewhere in your head. It probably makes less sense than the cartoons you were watching on TV at the time. And, you know, as you grow up, you kind of polish your understanding of the story, right? Why were they naked? That's bizarre. We're supposed to wear clothes. I knew that in kindergarten. At least if I didn't, it was on purpose. You know, to you it's clear everybody wears clothing. And then you grow up and you come to a point and you say, wait a second, why are we all wearing clothing? You know, why? We're not born that way. Classic anecdote is that Sophia, when she was like 3 or 4, my wife was pregnant, I think, with I forget which one of the kids, so she's finally like getting the idea that when her mother's pregnant, there's a baby there, which is like I mean, it's a miracle, you know, but it's pretty mind-boggling for a kid. So how does a kid see this? She's like, Ima, so there's a baby, you know, in your tummy. She's like, that's right, sweetheart. And the baby has hands. Yeah, that's how the baby has hands. The baby's got feet. Yeah, that's how the baby has feet. What color are his pajamas? He's got hands and feet. Don't tell me you didn't get onesies. I got a pair for my birthday. And it's like, why would a baby not have that? It's not sanua. Every time we go to take a bath, the first thing you take us out with a towel. You tell us not to take the towel off till we have clothes on under the towel. Sometimes we forget it, and that's a big mistake. So why would the baby not have clothes? That's so weird. So we're not born with clothing on, so why do we wear clothing? And why do we have to wear clothing? And at what point did this start? Was it always this way? And if not, so you go back and re-examine the story from another angle. Then you have this whole concept of the Nachash. Who are they talking to? What is this a reference to? Why would they be taking their orders or advice from anyone but Hashem? And the story, the plot thickens. It gets more and more complicated. So sometimes, something's going to change. It's the order of priority that it occupies in your neshama. I might be working on a mitzvah that I have a lot of trouble with. I might be working on an averah that I have a lot of trouble with. I might, there might be a theme in my life that I need to address. And so even for me personally, this might be my biggest mitzvah. I can think of a crazy example. I don't know if it's worth bringing up right now, but didn't mean to pique your curiosity. It's just, all right. It's a weird one. I'm sorry. It's what it is. It's holiday season. So, okay, there is such a concept as not just women but men also going to the mikveh for the purposes of purifying. So, I have such a custom for sofrim. Generally, try to go to the mikveh at least once a day before writing the name of Hashem, mezuzot, tefillin, sifrei Torah, etc. So generally, we do this all related in more ways than one to kedusha, to purity, to holiness, etc. If God forbid someone had bad tendencies, just assume, what could be worse than homosexual tendencies? Let's think along those lines. So maybe someone, I just happened to, long story. Anyway, maybe, an observant psychologist or a psychiatrist who is working with someone who has this problem would say, yes, it's true, Kedusha is tremendous. It's true that there's nothing holier than holy. It's something we aspire for. Given your particular situation, we might need to work on something else. Or maybe there's another way we can do this. We have to find some kind of a substitution or some kind of an alternative method. This might present you with more problems than it actually solves. So it might not be, this is the nature of halakha. And the Gemara says that learning the teaching and then applying it properly as halakha is nothing but divine help. is help from Hashem, because the answer that a competent Rav would give you is not the same answer he would give to him or to her or to them or to that couple. At any given point in your life, your order of priorities is going to change. It'll have to change. If you want to grow, you want to do more than you're currently doing, you need to look at things differently. So this mitzvah might be the most important thing in the world for me. For me, it's my problem. I'm really stingy. I don't like to spend money, and I need to learn about tzedakah. And someone who wastes a lot of money and gives it away and can't support his family, you have to work on being a little bit more stingy, a little more generous with his wife and less generous with everybody else. Call it what you will. People who have different appetites and different desires just need to focus on different things. So it's not only your understandings that change, the dynamic, fluid nature of spirituality is such that you change too, and you have your ups and downs, and you need to find the mitzvot and the perspective, the hashkafa that'll help you get back on track and do what you need to be doing. So there are the things that you learn, things that you haven't learned yet that might have to take priority or precedence, things that you enjoy doing, things that you don't enjoy as much, but it's the nature of learning about things, that there are general truths that you have to adhere to. And yes, it's true that different people have to focus on different things. That's not a lie. Lying would be telling everybody they'll have to do the same thing or the same way, or that there's a one-size-fits-all answer to lots of problems, and there's just not the way it is. So we got to please finish the paragraph for us if we can. Sure. You don't have to stop for so long in between readings. Yeah, we'll just finish these feelings.
Our sages thus said, "There is nothing in the Torah that is empty, that if expounded does not yield reward in this world, with the principle remaining intact in the world to come. That is, no small or large point of any general principle will be barren of ramifications. And if a point will not teach and have ramifications about certain particulars, it will about others."
This is a very comforting thought. Everything is related. So everything that you learn is going to connect to everything else. Sometimes as more general rules, sometimes more particular details, but it all has a place. So there's no such thing as time wasted learning. I'll refer back to what we said earlier tonight, which is you might be wasting your time because there's something much more important for you to be doing or to be focusing on, a much bigger picture that you're missing because you're not focusing on the right things. But at the end, you get, there's a reward to all of this because it's all going to come together. You learn Torah, all comes from the same place. It's all based on the same concepts, all designed to bring you to the same ultimate goal. So everything will fall into place. Just bear with me, the author, that we have to go through some general details, ignore others at least in the beginning, and then we'll put things back into perspective and back into place as we get there. So okay, just that little quick short paragraph, and we'll move on. Please do us a favor. Page 25, right in the middle. Intern.
A person must therefore...
Intern.
Yeah, intern. Yeah.
I'm sorry. In
Good.
turn, every general principle must provide some necessary information regarding all of its particular cases, for that is the nature of general principles.
Okay. So, general principles are not true without details or examples. It's impossible to connect to something completely and totally abstract that has no other angles to it. And every small detail connects to a bigger principle. So someone could theoretically open up a book anywhere and say, boom, here's a halakhic principle. You could say, true, it's a part of this, it belongs to that, in the general category of this. And you can break things down that way and make much more sense of it. That was a really short paragraph. You got ripped off. Sorry, go ahead. A person
must therefore be very careful when dealing with general principles. He should be very precise in examining their concepts, relationships, and connections, as well as the manner in which one concept is inferred from the other, from the beginning to the end. If one does this, he will be successful and gain insight.
Right. So make those connections. They're crucial. If you learn things that are detached and scattered, it is very discouraging very quickly. Someone who walks into yeshiva, just go ahead, let's start and get at it. And they start arguing about this tiny detail of a small paragraph, of a particular page of a small chapters, and he's like, well, this, I will never get through this. I just want to go to sleep and not wake up. So learning in such a way that it's more general, that the connections are easier to make, it's very important. Even as a teacher, I've taught at different age groups. I mean, it's so crucial for kids to understand that what they're learning has a point. And the point is that there's a bigger picture, and this is going to help you do the things you need to do. And if not, then they shouldn't be learning it. They're just wasting their time. I know a lot of teachers think that's their job, but the goal is to teach them things that are useful and practical and try to make these connections. Here's a really cute thing they've started doing in recent years. It wasn't so common when I was little. But it all turned out the way we did. They will try to integrate different concepts when they're teaching. So, for example, teaching Parashat HaShavua. So they would teach, because the dual curriculum is really tough for kids. I mean, we were in school when I was little. It was like 7:45 till 4:30 or so. It's a long day for kids. So let's say we're learning in Parashat HaShavua about Abraham Avinu and hospitality. So they would, nowadays, the schools they refer to this as progressive. I mean, but the kids in their secular studies would probably be doing something on the topic of hospitality, what your home looks like, tables, guests, friends, appropriate times to have people over, inappropriate times to have people over. What you can and can't do with friends, how you behave as a guest, how you behave as a host. Those are a really important lesson. Adults don't know these things.
Mm-hmm.
You either picked it up at some point or you didn't, but they didn't really explain it very well. So it's nice to be able to integrate things and make these connections. So here's a concept in Parashat HaShavua. Hey, you want to see how this applies to real life? You have real life situations in which someone who doesn't have where to go for Shabbat. Somebody who doesn't have plans, doesn't have a meal, doesn't know how to cook. Older people who don't have anyone to spend Shabbat with, etc. Bikur cholim. What does it mean? Were you ever sick? Who's sick today? Can we call them and do the mitzvah, etc.? So,
Theory and application.
yeah, it's basically learning how these mitzvot apply, how these things are practical, how they're tangible, and there's a general principle. There's a general concept of being sick, but until you find out what it's like to be sick and the particular things you can't do when you're sick, depending on the sickness and what makes you feel better, things make much more sense when you put them in perspective. So we'll leave it there. We'll definitely finish next week. Just explain a little bit about some books and delve into the depths of the creator of the world.
Yes.
Right? The first general principle, there is a God. We'll tackle that next week. Take a quick 2-minute break if you guys want.